now we call on Anitra to please.
Before I begin, this Western Hemisphere, which has many of the base concepts that I'll be speaking about, is available at gceef.org. It's called Future of the Western Hemisphere, and there were many authors, including Norman Borlaug on food, Mary Frances Bateson, who's the daughter of Margaret Mead, on social issues, and the two gentlemen here, and Andrew Orkey. And it has a lot of information, including disc at the back, with all the readouts of the American Hemisphere nations, 52 nations, and their 50-year future in all of the categories that we'll be talking about: food, energy, health, natural resources, etc., water. This is co-authored by Andrew Orkey. I'm going to talk about the resources in the future of the Pacific Rim countries. If there's to be a sustainable future for the 42 countries that rim the Pacific, we need these countries to decide how to steward their natural resources. From the dawn of civilization, they have all drawn very heavily on their natural resources and become very dependent on them, although the resources are obviously in each country and in the commons called the Pacific Ocean dwindling non-sustainably. The critical biological resources are the fisheries in the ocean, the forests which rim the ocean, water, both fresh water and Pacific water, and soil resources, as well as the mineral which goes from energy, which Dr. Stipo has just talked about, to things like manganese nodules on the bottom of the ocean. Perhaps the energy will become sustainable because these 42 nations will be forced to use their ocean energy, which includes wind, methane hydrates, ocean currents, ocean wave action, and others. But the conventional fuels, such as originally it was wood and charcoal, and now it's oil, gas, and coal, are very much in decline, except gas, which large amounts have been found in North America and some of the Arctic countries like Russia. Some of the development of infrastructure and industrialization, mostly in the last century, and the large increase in population around the Pacific Rim has created a dual capacity. There are still large agricultural societies in places like Philippines, China, Indonesia, and many of the Central and South American countries. Whereas Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, and North America have become highly, highly industrialized, with the agriculture being done by agro-industry rather than individual farmers. Water in Asia has become suddenly inadequate supply. It's still an adequate supply in the Western Hemisphere, particularly Canada and certain Central American countries, but inadequate on the Asian mainland. The Western Hemisphere ratio of water to per capita is really quite different from the Pacific Rim in Asia. And as a surprise, at the end of the second millennia, the degradation of accelerating rates, for instance, fisheries degradation, which fisheries could be considered the canary in the mine in terms of lack of restoration of fisheries, lack of judicious use, and lack of regional and national support to marshal the fisheries taking. We only have to look to the Black Sea, the most polluted of the 23 seas of the world, to see what happens when you are not stewarding your fisheries. And we're afraid that this same thing is going to happen in the next 50 years in the Pacific Rim. So let's look at the ocean from its historical standpoint. Originally, there was a very large Pacific Ocean, and then there was a landmass called Pangaea, which included Asia, North and South America, which were attached differently, and suddenly the Atlantic Ocean started opening There was no Atlantic Ocean, no Indian Ocean, just a big Pacific Ocean. So the Pacific Ocean is shrinking over time, even though it's only centimeters, and the Atlantic Ocean is widening over time, and so is the Indian Ocean. That's just from a very geologically historic perspective. Water, of course, was formed prior to the origin of the Earth, 10 billion years ago. And it's a conservative aspect of this planet. In other words, more water is not being made. It's being recycled from the ocean through the atmosphere and rained on and down through the rivers and back into the ocean. So if we aren't using clean water, this highly important component of life, all life, is based on water on this planet. The Pacific Ocean contains the mother lode of water on the planet. It has 622 million cubic kilometers of water, which is double that of the Atlantic Ocean, which is the next big container of water. Water cycling from evaporation of the Pacific Ocean very much affects the weather patterns in the Atlantic Ocean, in South America, Atlantic Ocean, in the Caribbean, and in the Indian Ocean and the Himalayas. So the precipitation and evaporation cycle is absolutely key to growing agriculture, to having drinking water for people, and for other things. If we misuse it by putting plastic over the top, which evidently we're now doing from just thoughtless dumping of plastic off the back of ships and from dump yards around the Pacific Rim into it, if we put a layer of plastic, that whole point of evaporation and then reprecipitation is going to change drastically. For instance, the El Nino and La Nina, which are Central Pacific cyclical oscillations, very much controls the weather of Brazil and the rainfall of Brazil to Brazilian forests and the Caribbean Antilles. The rainfall in the Indian Himalayas is controlled by the oscillations of the El Nino and El Nina. The accelerating use of water, particularly in the Asian Pacific countries, in the next 50 years is a matter of great concern. Central America will double its water use. South and North America will increase the water use by 165%, and these are based on the International Future Predictive Model of Barry Hughes that we use in this, which has a lot of international predictive models and can be used for each country in Western Hemisphere and the Pacific Rim. China, in particular, may be facing rapid desertification in its Gobi, Talamancan, and 9 other large deserts, which are now sending large amounts of soil and so forth to rain on other countries like South Korea and Japan and be taken into the Pacific Ocean. So water is critical for agriculture, human consumption, and environment, and must be marshaled in terms of industry and its effluents into the water in order to be made usable for all of life. Marine ecosystems and fish. The Pacific Ocean's marine ecosystem is the biggest ecosystem in the world. It covers 165.2 million kilometers, 33% of the world's surface. No other ecosystem, including the Amazon rainforest, can brag anything even close to that amount. So the Pacific Ocean is it in terms of ecosystems. The degradation of the northern and the southwestern sub-basin of the Pacific Ocean are very acute. Several of the 23 seas in the world's oceans, such as the Sea of Japan, the Yellow Sea, the South China Sea, are acutely degraded, as much so as the Arabian Gulf, which is basically an oil tank, and the Black Sea, which is basically runoff from Russia, which has accumulated at the bottom and created a total no-go zone for life at the bottom. FAO has said there are only 2 fisheries sustainable in the world. Those are in Peru and Chile and in Argentina. And this comes from the water which circulates around the Antarctic. Why is that so pure? Because there is a very deep Pacific current which comes up at the Antarctic, up wells. This contains water 400 to 600 years old, before industrialization, before all the factories were spewing and the sewers were spewing their waste into the Pacific Ocean. So it's very pure, ancient water, and it makes for a wonderful fishery, and it goes around the outside of the Antarctic continent and comes up flowing northward in Chile, Peru. Professor Daniel Pauly, in terms of fish in the Pacific Ocean, has reaffirmed with catch statistics of artisanal, which are small fishermen with small boats, and other fisher folk who don't have boats, who go out with nets or just wade out, asserting that the Pacific will be depleted of its present fish stock in 50 years. He made this prediction based on all of his statistics 5 years ago, so that means we have 45 years to turn the thing around. We're at the tipping point of the Pacific fisheries. He says we are fishing down the food web, which means we've caught the big predatory ones, and now we're at the next level of the food web, and we're catching the intermediate stocks. This already, if you remember, happened in the Atlantic Ocean, so that the fish and chips in Southampton, England, have all closed, and we are not getting certain fish. We have gone down the food web in the North Atlantic fisheries because of the pollution mainly that comes into that rather closed North Atlantic basin. So at the interface where the terrestrial runoff and the ocean water meets, which are the estuaries of the Pacific Rim, where the world's largest and highest productivity of life, be it fish, be it plants, we have systematically depleted this over the development of sewers, ports, channels, and industry causeways. And I already said the Black Sea fishing is almost defunct. And I was there last fall in Bulgaria looking at it, and there aren't any fishing fleets anymore. So the policy decision about challenges and solution to the restoration of the eco-services which the fish provide us. There are 4 billion people who are dependent on fish, where it is at least 25% of their protein diet. And these mostly are very poor people who live at the edge of the Pacific Rim, and some of them live at the edge of the African rims. These eco-services are lost, but there are ways to renew the estuaries, restore the estuaries, and to clean up all this effluent. The plants and the animals also give us carbon restoration for climate change and produce oxygen, which we breathe, and they enhance the bottom stabilization. Forests. Most of the 42 nations had forests covering their coastal areas and their mountains leading into the Pacific. And almost all of those are denuded, except some in the Arctic and some that rim toward in the Western Hemisphere, such as Peru still has 75% of its forest, but it's also a question of having a road up to the backside of the Peruvian Andes. And Chile still has some of its forests. And this is from FAO in 2005. Massive logging, of course, has traditionally denuded this, clearing for agriculture, and the soil erosion, which has come from the steep mountains right down into the estuaries, has been a part of this problem, because when the soil gets into the estuary, it pollutes the water clarity for the plants under the water that are the habitat for the fish eggs. So we need more fish protein, and we're denuding our forests, and that's another problem. So I've already given you the nutshell of the estuaries where the terrestrial productivity and the sea productivity meet. And don't think that there's lots of productivity out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. There isn't. The highest productivity is right around the edge and the rim. If you look at the carbon and productivity maps of the Pacific Ocean, and I'm sorry we didn't have a PowerPoint because I could have shown this to you, you see it's a desert out in the middle of the Pacific. And it's very, very fertile right around the edge, be it you in Alaska or be you in the Antarctic or be you in South America. It's a desert in the middle where there's few nutrients, and it's very productive along the edges. Now, the Arctic and the Antarctic are our great white hope because there's a large volume of this slowly circulating water which upwells at the Bering Straits are a shelf that comes up like this, and it upwells at the Bering Shelf and goes into this deep water, goes into the Arctic. There's a basic inflow from the Pacific Ocean, unlike the Atlantic where it outflows. And at the Antarctic, the water from the very deep comes up and then it flows around the Antarctic like that. This was discovered by Klaus Wertke in 1961. And due to the glacial melt and the ice melt, we're having a lot of minerals and other things becoming uncovered in the Arctic because the Earth is tilted on its axis, so there's more glaciation going on at the Antarctic, and the Arctic is tipped toward the sun, so there's more melting here in the Arctic, and the passages are opening up, so there's going to be a lot of development, gas, oil, minerals, fisheries. Who's going to go in and take all those fish in the Arctic? The other thing is happening is that energy will be explored that hasn't been in the like in Greenland. As the ice caps melt in Greenland, vast energy is uncovered, as well as minerals. And the passageways past Canada that go over to North America and Europe are going to be used very heavily by the Asian Pacific countries, including Russia is going to have to build a lot more of its Asian Pacific Russia than it's been very focused on the Atlantic and the Baltic Sea. And there's going to be a mass migration, is our prediction, into the Pacific Russia, even though it's cold, even though it is not very developed at this point. But theories of the melting ice are that this transport across the Arctic is going to happen. The Arctic has 10 to 12% of the world's energy total, and gas and oil exploration. And we are going to see a wave of ocean thermal, wind, current, and wave action energy. Also, the technologies are not yet in place to make it cost efficient, but many, many people are working on this. So the energy demand, for instance, the Pacific rim of the Western Hemisphere, North America is going to go from 16 billion barrels to 22 billion barrels per year. South America from 1.5 to 6. That's almost a four-fold increase. Central America from 0.1 billion barrels to 0.4. That's a four-fold increase. China, Japan, Korea, Indonesia, the demand will double for energy. So there's got to be a lot more energy in this next 50 years coming from someplace. Will it be renewable? Will it be fossil and add to the problems? Or will technology invent something new like the methane hydrate extraction to be useful? Populations. We're going to have Central America grow double in size from 36 million to 78 million, unrestrained growth. South America, much more restraint, is going to go 33% from 350 to 522 million. Indonesia, for instance, will be going from 243 million to 305 million, which is about 25%, and Philippines from 93 million to 154, which is not quite doubling in size, but about 75% increase. As I've said, Russia will have a mass migration of a lot of people following jobs, money, extractive oil and mineral industries, moving to the Pacific part of the, and of course, North America is going to be about 20% increased. The minerals in the great expanses of the Pacific Ring are due to the ring of fire, so that the core earth elements have come up through the volcanic and plate tectonic activities, bubbled out, and formed pure mineral veins in places like Chile, Peru, in Papua New Guinea, Philippines, and of course in many of the Ring of Fire Pacific places. Canadian Rockies are another example. Russia has huge amount of mineral of all kinds resources in its Pacific Arctic stretches. So there is going to be an enormous gathering of the manganese nodules at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, sand and gravel, which are sedimentary, not bubbling up from the volcanoes. Rare earth metals, iron, copper, nickel, titanium, cobalt, and trace metals. So that's a prediction that there's going to be a lot more extractive industries. Now, what are the solutions? First solution, we have to admit that the public policy since World War II, which were on environmental conservation, particularly since the Stockholm Conference in Environment, the Law of the Sea Conference, the United Nations, various conferences for FAO and for biodiversity, are simply not working to sustain the resources in the Pacific Rim countries. They're not working. That has to be the beginning. And Pauly and Sugiyama and other people in 2004, other people have written extensively, be it the biodiversity, be it the fisheries, or other parts of the non-sustainable. What is the progress right now being made by the Law of the Sea to enforce its specific agreements? What is the stewardship in the UN demanding the share? Let's take a hypothetical and a critical question for marine resources. Does China deserve to extract from the Pacific a proportion equal to its population, of the Earth's population? Or is China simply one of 200-plus countries who belongs to the United Nations and who should take 1/200th of the fish resources in the Pacific Ocean? Or should it extract as much as it's physically capable of extracting, since there's no policy enforcement? What is the role of the UN, of policy, of international agreements, and the ability of a country to extract what it wishes to extract to feed its people? Are the IMO accords working in the Pacific Ocean? Who's enforcing the treaties after the 200-mile? Who's going to lose? Who's going to win? We certainly know the many small Pacific islands from Nauru and Palau onward are going to lose this battle because they can't police the piracy occurring to their resources. So short-term gains are appearing to overshadow longer-term stewardship. Giant nations who've always been concerned with the distance that the Pacific offers them have changed their concept of the difference as new technologies such as ballistic missiles and all kinds of other things have come on. But they've embraced military technology. They haven't embraced restorative biological and environmental technology, like cleaning water, like restoring forests, restoring fish, restoring massive amounts of resources to each of these countries. This should be shared freely. Planting a tree is not rocket science. This should be freely shared between the northern nations and those who, in the Pacific Rim, need to restore their fish, their water, their resources. And second, anticipatory planning, so that you don't put a factory right on the edge of an important tourist coral reef, as they have in many countries in South Pacific and in the Western Hemisphere also. So each nation from Nauru to Russia has experienced and become aware recently of their losses and the fact that there is a turning point. So this is a critical moment where we could go to governments and say to them, you really need a new operational mode. You need to plan that your resources sustain into the next century. We need to lift people from poverty, which is the other part of the equation, their micro-enterprise. People are giving billions of dollars out for microfinance, but they don't have micro-enterprise attached. This is Andrew Orkey's great thing in life, that he was working in 38 countries in Africa and 160 countries around the world to help them with their micro-enterprise for people who are in dire poverty, who are chopping down the trees and making things. So should we steward or should we squander? And this is the question for the next century.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thorhaug. Could we now